Let us know the Bible, Old Testament. With Father Claudio Doglio. Biblical Narrative Theology. In the Bible collection of the Old Testament, we find a series of short stories that are difficult to place in a specific group. So I propose to collect them as narrative theology in the sense that they are narratives with a didactic purpose. They are directed to theological teaching. Let us consider 5 of them: Ruth, Jonah, Tobit, Esther, and Judith. We could call them historical books, but knowing that they are not historical, maybe there is a foundation in history, but they are historical novels with a didactic purpose. The book of Ruth is placed between the book of Judges and the first book of Samuel. That is, in the collection of historians of the Deuteronomistic traditions. But in reality, it does not belong to this school. It is written in the post-exile period to demonstrate a theological thesis, probably in the 5th century. What does Ruth's book say? The story of this Moabite woman. Moab is an eastern region beyond the Dead Sea, and in the tradition of Israel, it has always been considered an unclean, truly repugnant nation to be kept away and despised. The book talks about a Moabite woman, a good, a holy woman, a low-income family from Bethlehem, due to lack of food, moved to the territory of Moab. A man with his wife and 2 children. The children married and took foreign women. Then the men died, and only the women were left. Old Naomi decided to return and set the 2 women free. One chose to stay with her, and the other left. The 2 women returned poor and alone to Bethlehem. Ruth began to work as a gleaner, picking up the fallen grains in the fields. She caught the attention of a certain Boaz, owner of that field, a distant relative of her family. And in the end, Boaz married Ruth, and from their marriage, a child was born, Obed. That is, it was father of Jesse, who was the father of David. This story of poor women finishes with the genealogy of King David. It was absolutely forbidden to marry foreign women when the book was written. The author of this book says that there are good and holy foreign women. And if in ancient times this rule had been applied, there would not be King David, because David is descended from a Moabite woman. The author is a fine theologian who tells a story with a very precise moral instead of an abstract reasoning. It is openness to foreigners, to the possibility of good, even if it is beyond the confines of Israel. Very close to the author of Ruth is the author of the book of Jonah. The book of Jonah is inserted into the collection of the 12 prophets, but it is different from the other prophets. It does not contain oracles, but the very life of the prophet. The author narrates in 4 scenes the life of this prophet, whose name means dove. It is the story of the prophet Dob, who, sent by God to Nineveh, disobeys, and instead of going where he was sent, goes in the opposite direction. He embarks to the far west in a ship heading to Spain. But the ship goes through a severe storms and risks being shipwrecked until the sailors throw Jonah into the sea, responsible for that storm. He is thrown into the sea and swallowed by a big fish. He stays 3 days and 3 nights at the bottom of the abyss. Then Jonah, repentant, recognizes his mistake and begs the Lord, and the Lord commands the fish to cast out Jonah, and Jonah is on the beach at the starting point. Third scene, the Lord resumes from the beginning and tells Jonah to go to Nineveh and preach to them. It is a mission to the other people that Jonah had no intention of doing, but now he listens. He will preach in the great metropolis, the city of sinners par excellence. And those sinners are converted. They listen to the preaching. They change, they do penance, and Jonah gets angry. Fourth scene. He returns to the mountain angry with the Lord because he forgives them instead of destroying that city. Jonah would like to die, among other things, and he feels overwhelmed by the great heat. The Lord made a castor plant grow to create a shadow, and Jonah felt relief in that shadow. But during the night, the Lord sent a worm to eat the roots of that castor plant that dried up. Jonah was angry again, cursing this day. At that moment, the Lord asked the question with which the book ends. But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. Should I not have concern with the great city of Nineveh, in which there is all that mass of people?" The book ends with a question. Again, we have a theology of openness to foreigners. Jonah represents the same people of Israel. In the first phase, he is the sinful, disobedient people of the wrecked ancient history. The great fish that swallows Jonah symbolizes chaos, the monster of confusion. It is the exile, the ruin Israel was subjected to, the significant failure from which, however, it manages to emerge. The story begins again. The author lives precisely in this phase of the resumption of the history of Israel. The mission begins again. The people of Israel, that is, the prophet Jonah, is sent to other peoples. Israel must understand that its mission is not to close but to open, not to isolate itself, but to announce God's work of salvation to other nations. Jonah gives a bad impression. He gives the image of a mean man closed in his own problems, concerned only about himself, while the theological author shows the great openness of God's heart and interest in all peoples. The other three books of this narrative theology have a lesser theological level and contain stories with many more details. They are authentic novels, especially the story of Tobias, the story of fiancés, a story of two young people who get married after many alterations. Despite his honesty and scrupulous observance of the law, the righteous Tobit becomes blind. He faces the problem that Job had already announced and encountered. How do you explain it? It is the drama of a just man who suffers a misfortune. And the novel tells that this misfortune how should be interpreted as a test. Old Tobit, who has become blind, wants to send his son Tobias to the other side of the world to retrieve a deposit, a large sum of money he had left many years before with a relative, a banker. And so the journey begins. Tobias sets out on the long journey to recover the treasure. The travel companion will be the angel Raphael, who appears in human form as Azariah, a name that is a whole program. It means God helps. The angel Raphael accompanies Tobias in this journey of human initiation. One night, while descending into the river, Tobias is attacked by a big fish during the trip. Raphael invites the young man to take the fish, catch it, dismember it, and remove the gold, the heart, and the liver, and keep it because they will be useful. The image of the fish symbolically reminds us the monster, the night waters, the chaos, the evil. There is an overturn of what is evil that becomes something useful. During the trip, they stop at a Jewish family, relatives of Tobias, where a young girl named Sarah lives there who had painful experiences. She had already married several men, but they all died, killed by a demon. The young woman is under the control of a demon, Asmodeus, who is jealous of her. And this demon kills her husbands on the first wedding night. Tobias falls in love with Sarah, at first sight and asks her to marry him. Sarah's father hesitates to give him his daughter because he knows what happened to the husbands, but he insists and is advised by Raphael to put what he took from the fish into the brazier. With those vapors, he will drive away the demon Asmodeus that Raphael will block, and the two will be united in marriage and will be able to live happily and contentedly. They celebrate the wedding. Raphael goes to collect the money. Tobias and Sarah, happy spouses, return home, and still with the entrails of the fish, Tobias cures the old father, who will recover the sight, will recover the money, will have the young man safe and sound with a beautiful wife and a rich dowry, and all live happily ever after. There are problems in life. Sometimes the righteous suffer, but God's hands slowly puts everything in its place. It is a story of providence, of God's saving intervention. In the other book of Esther, a liberation is told. Another story of women. Esther is a poor Israeli girl who lives in the Persian environment and is chosen because she is beautiful to become queen of Persia and ends up in the great harem of Ahasuerus, the one that we know from the history of Greek as Xerxes. A minister of Ahasuerus, Haman, is angry with the behavior of Mordecai, a Jew who does not want to kneel before authority. Mordecai is a relative of Esther. Mordecai is the image of the faithful Jew who, even abroad, never fails in his religious fidelity and therefore is persecuted by the evil Haman, who makes the king sign a decree to exterminate all Jews. Mordecai tries to contact Esther and asks her to speak to the king on behalf of his people. Esther risks her life because she cannot appear before the emperor if she is not called. She could be sentenced to death, but she attempts it. Esther appears before Ahasuerus and intercedes for her people. She invites the king to eat in the harem and invites him along with Prime Minister Haman. And during the banquet, the queen reveals the prime minister's plot to the king. The king is angry and condemns Haman to death, which is immediately executed. The decree against the Jews is annulled, and it is the turning of fortune. This story is at the origin of the Jewish festival of Purim, which means precisely lots. God has reverted the destiny. The persecuted Jews were to be destroyed, but instead they are prodigiously liberated and saved. The wicked who wanted to do evil has been in turn destroyed. God saves the humble, the poor, the weak who trust in Him. It is the same story that is repeated in Judith, another woman who bears the feminine name of Judah. She is the Jewess, the image of the faithful woman. We're in front of an authentic fable, even with invented geographical names. The evil protagonist is a bad general, full of fairness, who wants to conquer Jerusalem. The last fortress before reaching the holy city is Bethulia, a city that does not exist. It is a symbolic image. It would mean the Virgin of God. It is the image of the faithful city. He surrounds this city of Bethulia, besieged it, and is about to conquer it. Inside the city, men do not know what to do until Judith appears, a young widow, the image of a woman of integrity, honesty, fidelity, and respectful of the law, who is in charge of saving the people. She leaves the city with her servant. Due to her beauty, she is accepted in the camp of Holofernes. Seducing the general, she cheats him, lets herself be come to the bed, and then she cuts his head. With the sword she cut the head. The servant puts the head in a shopping bag, and the two women return at night to the city of Bethulia. It is a story that we have already read in the book of Samuel. Little David defeated the great Goliath, and with his word he cuts off his head. Here we have the story of a defenseless woman who eliminates the great general who believed he was the eternal Father. In the morning, the soldiers find the general dead. They flee, and Bethulia is released. Inside the city, they celebrate and sing in honor of Judith. Blessed are you among women. You are the most glorious woman. You are the glory of Jerusalem, the honor of the people, the joy of Israel. A single weak woman has defeated an army of men. This is also narrative theology. It is a didactic story. The tiny remnant of Israel, poor but faithful, can win over all enemies with the sword of prayer. It is trusting God who saves, not human means and structures. This very theology is also open to the gospel message. The servant of God, Jesus, in his weakness, in his humility, as a victim, he will be the victor and extend God's salvation to all peoples. And so we close our introductory overview of the Old Testament. We conclude this series, and we hope to meet again for a new series about deepening the study of the Bible. Goodbye.